My name is Alex Thompson, and what I'm about to tell you isn't a story I enjoy revisiting. It lives under my skin, a constant, low-grade hum of fear that spikes whenever the wind rustles the leaves outside my window. Just so. Or when the shadows stretch too long in the late afternoon. Most days, I manage. Most days, I can almost convince myself it was a hallucination, a product of exhaustion and isolation. But I know what I saw. I know what happened in the deep, ancient heart of the Redwood National Park. And I know I'm lucky to be alive to tell it. Though sometimes Sif, sometimes Lux, feels like a different kind of curse. It started, as these things often do, with a mix of ambition and foolishness. I'm an amateur photographer, or at least I was. I had this idea, this obsession, really, with capturing the perfect shot of the coastal redwoods. These titans that have watched over the California coast for millennia. They weren't just trees to me. They were history made manifest. Silent witnesses to a hoax. But I wasn't just after the grandeur everyone sees. I was chasing something more elusive. Something whispered about in niche forums and old forestry journals, the albino redwoods, the so-called ghost trees. These strange, pallid growths. Genetic mutations lacking chlorophyll. Surviving parasitically off their healthy brethren. The idea captivated me. They were beautiful aberrations. Stark white against the deep green and rust, red palette of the forest. Locals sometimes spoke of them with a superstitious reverence, calling them spirits or bad omens. I dismissed it as folklore, the kind of tall tales lumberjacks might spin. But the photographic potential was undeniable. I wanted to capture that spectral beauty, that eerie contrast. I read about specific grooves, like the Berry Glen Trail or areas within Humboldt Redwoods, State Park further south, known for harboring these anomalies, some hidden deep off the beaten path. That was my goal, find one of the more remote, undocumented ghost trees and get the shot. I prepared meticulously, or so I thought. Topographical maps. GPS device, though, I knew service would be spotty at best. Enough supplies for 3 days solo hiking. Maybe 4 if I stretched it. I told my roommate my general route, a loop off one of the lesser used trails heading deep into the park's northern section. Known for its dense old growth and varied genetics, the kind that produced those botanical freaks mentioned in one article I'd found. I felt confident, perhaps overly so. The warnings about the park's vastness, the sudden coastal fogs, the sheer disorienting scale of the place, I heard them. But I didn't listen. I was young, fit, and chasing an image. What could go wrong? The first day was intoxicating. Entering the redwood forest is like stepping into another world. Another time. The air changes instantly, cool, damp, heavy, with the scent of loam and something ancient, resinous, almost sacred. Sunlight struggles to pierce the dense canopy hundreds of feet above, filtering down in hazy, shifting columns that illuminate patches of ferns and sorrel on the forest floor. The scale is humbling, almost oppressive. You walk among giants that were saplings when Rome was rising, trees that dwarf cathedrals. It makes you feel profoundly small, insignificant. And the silence, it's not just quiet. It's a presence, a deep, resonant hush that absorbs sound. My footsteps on the needle-strewn path seemed muffled, intrusive. Birdsong was rare, distant. It felt watchful, expectant. I pushed deeper, leaving the marked trail behind after a few miles. Why? Relying on my map and compass, navigating by the contours of the land and the flow of almost dry creek beds. I saw some of the unusual trees mentioned in my research. One gnarled giant that looked like a clenched fist. Another scarred, with bulbous burls that resembled weeping sores. They were fascinatingly grotesque, adding to the primeval atmosphere. I even passed a perfect circle of younger redwoods, sprouting around a decaying central stump, a fairy ring. Beautiful, yes, but standing within it, I felt a strange, inexplicable reluctance to linger, a feeling of trespassing. Why? It was late afternoon on the second day, when the first real tendrils of unease began to curl around the edges of my awe. I'd been hiking for hours, pushing further into a particularly dense section, hoping to find a rumored albino cluster near a specific raven mentioned in an old hiker's blog post. The light was fading fast under the thick canopy, the air growing colder. The silence deepened, pressing in. It wasn't just quiet anymore, it felt empty, like the forest was holding its breath. I stopped to check my map, pulling out my compass. That's when I heard it. A single, sharp crack like a heavy branch snapping. Not far off, maybe 50 yards into the dense undergrowth to my left. I froze, listening. Deer, maybe a bear. I scanned the trees, seeing nothing but layers of shadow, and the massive, fluted trunks disappearing into the gloom. The sound wasn't repeated. Probably just a dead branch falling, I told myself. Happens all the time. But the hair on the back of my neck prickled. It had sounded deliberate. I packed my map away, trying to shake off the feeling. Must be tired, getting spooked by shadows. I pushed on, but my senses were suddenly on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of timber in the non-existent wind seemed magnified. I started glancing over my shoulder, peering into the dense thickets of huckleberry and sword fern. The feeling of being watched settled over me, heavy and unwelcome. It's a primal instinct, hard to ignore even when your rational mind insists you're alone. Then came the fog. It rolled in from the west, silent and swift, a characteristic of the coastal ranges, but unnerving nonetheless. One minute I could see maybe 100 feet between the trees. The next my world shrank to a radius of 20. The colossal trunks became gray ghosts, their tops swallowed by the swirling white. The already dim light grew dimmer, casting everything in an ethereal, monochromatic pallor. Disorientation set in quickly. Landmarks vanished. The silence became even more profound, muffled by the damp air. Yet, somehow, paradoxically, I felt I could hear more tiny, indistinct sounds that seemed to emanate from the fog itself. Was that a footstep? A soft shuffle just at the edge of hearing. I stopped again, straining my ears. Nothing but the dripping of condensation from the high branches. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This is ridiculous, Alex, I chided myself. It's just fog. Just the woods playing tricks on you. But the feeling of being observed, of not being alone was stronger than ever. I decided to make camp early, finding a relatively flat spot near the base of a truly monstrous redwood. I cleared a small area, trying to make my movements quiet, purposeful. As I unrolled my sleeping bag, I noticed something odd. A small, smooth river stone sat perched on top of my neatly packed tent, which I'd strapped to the outside of my backpack. I definitely hadn't put it there. It wasn't precariously balanced, it was placed deliberately. My stomach went cold. Where had it come from? Had it fallen from the tree? Unlikely. Had I somehow knocked it there myself without noticing? Possible. But it felt wrong. It felt like a marker, a message. Dismissing it took more effort this time. I tossed the stone away, trying to ignore the tremor in my hands. I ate a cold ration bar, too unnerved to risk building a fire, though the damp chill was seeping into my bones. Why? As twilight deepened into an almost impenetrable darkness beneath the trees and fog, I zipped myself into my tent, clutching my heavy-duty flashlight like a weapon. Sleep was impossible. Every sound outside the thin nylon walls was amplified, distorted. The drip of moisture, the sighing creak of ancient wood, and then something else. A low sound barely audible, drifting through the fog. It wasn't an animal cry I recognized. It was a drawn-out, mournful sound, almost like a moan, but deeper, resonating in a way that seemed to vibrate in my chest. It rose and fell, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It faded, then returned, slightly closer this time. I lay there rigid, barely breathing, straining to pinpoint the source. Was it the wind? There was no wind. Was it some geological phenomenon? An animal in distress? Or was it something else? Something moving out there in the fog-shrouded, ancient woods. Something that knew I was there, huddled and alone in my fragile shelter. The rationalizations were failing fast. The awe I'd felt upon entering the park had curdled into a thick, cold dread. The silence of the redwoods was no longer peaceful. It was the predatory stillness before a strike. And I had a sickening feeling that whatever was making that sound was just getting started. We soon discovered why. The ghost trees I'd come to photograph suddenly felt like the least strange thing in this forest. My breath hitched in my throat. Why? Each inhale shallow against the oppressive silence between the moans. The sound wasn't constant. It would ebb away. Why? Leaving only the maddening drip of condensation, lulling me into a false of security for a few heartbeats before rising again, closer, deeper, more guttural. It wasn't just mournful now. There was an undercurrent of something else, a low growl, perhaps. A wet, rasping quality that scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. I squeezed the flashlight, my knuckles white. Its beam a pathetic con slicing through the absolute blackness inside the tent. Outside, the fog pressed in, a tangible entity, turning my small shelter into an island in a sea of white nothingness. Then, a new sound, snuffling. Wet, deliberate inhalations, right outside the tent wall, inches from my head. My blood turned to ice water, every muscle locked. I could almost feel the fabric indent slightly, as if something heavy was leaning against it, testing its give. Panic clawed its way up my throat, hot and acidic. This wasn't an animal. Not any animal I knew. Bears don't moon like that. Deer don't sniff around tents with such intent. The sound moved along the side of the tent, slow, methodical. Sniff, sniff, drag. A dragging sound, like something heavy and rough being pulled across the damp forest floor. A smell seeped through the nylon, thick and cloying. Not just the usual damp earth and decaying leaves. This was different. Musky, rank like wet fur, and something vaguely metallic like old blood. It filled the small space, suffocating me, triggering a primal gag reflex. I clamped a hand over my mouth, terrified that any sound, even the slightest gasp, would betray my presence, though it was blindingly obvious something knew I was here. The stone on the tent hadn't been an accident. It was an announcement. I see you. The snuffling stopped directly opposite the tent flap. Silence stretched, thick and unbearable. I could hear my own pulse hammering in my ears. A frantic drumbeat against the profound stillness outside. What was it doing? Waiting. Observing. My mind raced. Cycling through improbable explanations: a deformed bear, a lost hiker driven mad by isolation. Maybe even some kind of bizarre auditory hallucination brought on by fear and the fog. But the smell, the feeling of presence just beyond the thin barrier, it was too real. MP. A heavy impact vibrated through the ground beneath me, close, just outside the tent. It wasn't a footstep. It was heavier, like something massive had been dropped or had slammed a limb down. I flinched violently, stifling a cry. The moaning started again, louder this time, closer, a resonant, chest-cavitating sound that seemed to shake the very air. It wasn't a sound of pain. It felt like communication, a warning, or worse, anticipation. I couldn't stay here. The thin nylon walls felt utterly useless. A paper shield against whatever waited outside. The feeling of being trapped, cornered, was overwhelming. My survival instinct screamed, overriding the paralysis of fear. Run. The thought was pure, primal. Forget the ghost trees, forget the photos, forget everything but getting away. With a surge of adrenaline, I fumbled for the zipper on the tent flap, my fingers clumsy and shaking. The sound rasped loudly in the stillness. Outside, the moaning stopped abruptly. A low, menacing growl took its place, vibrating through the tent fabric. I didn't hesitate. Ripping the flap open, I scrambled out. Flashlight held high, plunging into the disorienting white wall of fog. Cold, damp air hit my face. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. The colossal redwood trunks were indistinct columns fading into the swirling gray above and below. I spun around, trying to get my bearings. Flashlight beam cutting wildly through the mist. My campsite was a small, insignificant clearing. Behind the tent, where the sounds had been concentrated, nothing. Just the impenetrable wall of white. But the smell was stronger out here, thick and nauseating. Which way? My sense of direction was shot. The trail was somewhere west. North. The fog distorted everything, muffled sound, played tricks on the eyes. I picked a direction, away from the monstrous redwood I'd camped beside, and bolted, crashing blindly through the undergrowth. Branches whipped at my face. Unseen roots and slick leaf litter threatened to send me sprawling with every step. The forest floor was uneven, treacherous. Ferns and thorny bushes tore at my clothes. It was like fighting the forest itself. Behind me, I heard it. A heavy crashing, mirroring my own panicked flight. But faster, more powerful. Branches snapped with explosive force, the sound impossibly loud, impossibly close. It wasn't running, it was pursuing. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Through a momentary thinning of the fog, I saw movement. Something tall. Impossibly tall, it seemed. Towering even amongst the redwood understory. Dark, indistinct, moving with an unnatural, loping gait that covered ground with terrifying speed. It wasn't shaped like a bear, or anything else I could name. The glimpse was fleeting, slowed by the fog almost instantly. But the image burned itself onto my retinas, wrongness personified. Panic lent me speed I didn't know I possessed. I ran recklessly, heedless of the terrain, driven by pure terror. The crashing behind me kept pace, sometimes seeming to fall back, sometimes drawing alarmingly close. The low, guttural growls echoed through the trees, distorted by the fog, sounding like they were coming from multiple directions at once. Was it hunting me? Playing with me? My foot caught on a hidden root. I pitched forward, tumbling down a short, steep embankment, landing hard on my side, in a tangle of wet ferns and mud. The flashlight flew from my grasp, its beam spinning crazily, before extinguishing with a faint pop. Darkness, absolute and profound, slammed down. I lay there, winded, bruised, momentarily stunned. Above me on the lip of the embankment, the crashing stopped. Silence. Even the dripping seemed to cease. The forest held its breath again. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. The smell washed over me again, stronger than ever. A full miasma of decay and wet earth and that sharp coppery tang. Then, a soft sound, almost gentle. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps approaching the edge of the slope above me. Slow, deliberate. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for what? Teeth. Claws. I could hear it breathing now. A ragged, wet sound like air being forced through damaged lungs. It was right above me. I could feel the weight of its presence. A palpable pressure in the darkness. Curiosity, morbid and insane, warred with terror. I had to see. I had to know what had me humming through the fog-drenched nightmare. Slowly, trembling uncontrollably, I opened my eyes. The fog swirled, thicker here in the gully, but thinning slightly overhead. Against the slightly less opaque gray, a silhouette began to resolve itself. Tall, yes, impossibly so, hunched over the edge, peering down. Long limbs, disproportionate to its bulk, ending in something that wasn't quite hands. The shape of the head was wrong, elongated. And were those 2 points of light reflected faintly from the gloom. Eyes. Pale, luminous, reflecting ambient light that didn't seem to exist. They weren't animal eyes. They held a terrifying stillness, an ancient, alien intelligence. They fixed on me, pinning me to the muddy ground. And then, it lowered its head further. The details still frustratingly obscured by shadow and fog, but close enough now that I could make out more. It wasn't fur covering its form, not entirely. It looked fibrous. like bark almost interwoven with matted, dark hair. And the smell that wasn't just decay. It was the scent of the redwoods themselves, amplified, twisted, corrupted. It opened its mouth, and the low moan I'd heard earlier issued forth, but distorted now, broken by a series of wet clicks and pops. It wasn't a sound of aggression. It sounded almost curious. Then, one of those long, bark-like arms reached down towards me, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't coming to attack. It was reaching for me. And I saw the end of the limb clearly for the first time. Not fingers. Twisted, root-like appendages, slick with mud, and something darker, ending in points like sharpened stakes. The sight broke something inside me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But it was reaching. And as those root fingers brushed against my outstretched hand, cold and hard as stone, the world tilted. We discovered why. And the darkness behind my eyes finally swallowed the impossible thing in the fog. Cold seeped into me from the damp earth. A chilling embrace that jolted me back to consciousness. Or perhaps semi-consciousness. My head throbbed. A dull counterpoint to the sharp sting of cuts and bruises blooming across my body from the fall and frantic flight. Mud caked my clothes, my skin, my hair. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my eyes, only to realize the actual fog still clung, heavy and thick in the gully, swallowing sound and sight. How long had I been out? Minutes, hours. The perpetual twilight beneath the redwoods offered no clues. My first coherent thought was raw terror on it. Was it still here? I strained my ears, listening past the frantic pounding in my chest. Silence. A profound, unnatural silence that felt heavier, more menacing than the earlier sounds. The dripping condensation seemed to have stopped. The air hung still and cold. The rank, bloody, earthy smell that had heralded its presence was fainter now, almost gone, leaving only the clean, damp scent of redwood loam. It had moved on. Or perhaps it was simply waiting. I pushed myself up, muscles screaming in protest. Pain shot through my ankle as I put weight on it, sprained, maybe worse. Great. Just great. Lost, injured, weaponless, my heavy flashlight was gone, swallowed by the darkness and mud during my tumble. Panic threatened to bubble up again, a hysterical giggle trapped in my throat. I choked it down. Panicking wouldn't help. Surviving was the only priority now. Forget the ghost trees, forget the photos, just get out. Clambering awkwardly out of the gully, using exposed roots as handholds, I scanned the limited visibility. Which way? The fog rendered the landscape a confusing maze of identical, colossal trunks. My compass was in my pack, assuming I even still had my pack. A quick, fumbling check confirmed it was still strapped to my back, miraculously. But using it felt almost pointless. Every direction looked the same shade of gray. Every tree a potential hiding place for it. The feeling of being watched hadn't entirely dissipated. It clung to me like the damp air, a constant prickle on my skin. I had to move. Staying put felt like an invitation. I picked a direction I felt, vaguely recalling the general slope of the land from my map, and started walking, or rather, limping. Progress was agonizingly slow. Every step sent jolts of pain up my leg. The undergrowth fought me, thorny vines snagging my clothes, slick leaves threatening to send me sprawling again. The silence persisted, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the crunch of debris underfoot. It felt wrong. Forests, even redwood forests, usually had some sound, the scurry of small animals, distant bird calls, the wind sighing through the canopy. This utter stillness felt like the forest itself was holding its breath, complicit in whatever horror stalked its depths. My mind started playing tricks. Shapes in the fog resolved into menacing figures before dissolving back into tree trunks. Every creak of wood sounded like a footstep. Was that the low moan again, carried on a non-existent breeze, or just the blood rushing in my ears? Paranoia gnawed at me. Was I losing my mind? Was this whole thing a product of isolation and fear? A waking nightmare brought on by the disorienting environment? But the memory of those pale eyes, that bark-like skin, those root fingers, it felt terrifyingly real. Hours seemed to pass. Or maybe it was just minutes. Time lost meaning in the gray, unchanging gloom. I stumbled onward, driven by a primal need to escape, fueled by dwindling adrenaline and sheer terror. I kept checking my compass, trying to maintain a semblance of a consistent direction. But the swirling fog and the need to constantly detour around impenetrable thickets or fallen giants made me doubt my navigation. Was I just walking in circles? Then I saw them. Scratches. Deep gouges in the thick, fibrous bark of a massive redwood, starting near the base and extending upwards, far higher than any bear could reach. 3 parallel lines dug deep into the wood, fresh enough that tiny slivers of reddish bark littered the ground below. It looked like something immense had clawed its way up the trunk, or perhaps marked it. A territorial sign, a warning. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an animal marking. This felt deliberate, intelligent, alien. Nearby, nestled amongst the roots of another giant, was a small, deliberate pile of smooth river stones, almost identical to the one left on my tent. Not a natural formation. Arranged. Another marker. Or something else. A shrine. An offering. The implication sent a fresh wave of dread washing over me. This creature wasn't just a mindless beast. It had purpose. It had rituals. I backed away slowly, scanning the fog. Shrouded trees around me, heart hammering. The feeling of being watched intensified tenfold. I turned and scrambled away as fast as my injured ankle would allow, pushing through ferns and branches, desperate to put distance between myself and that unsettling display. The terrain began to change subtly. The ground became softer, spongier underfoot. The air heavier, damper. The fog seemed to coalesce, swirling in strange patterns. And then, through a momentary parting in the mist, I saw it. Not the trail. Not civilization. Something else. A cluster of trees, stark white against the deep green and brown, rising like skeletal fingers from the forest floor. The albino redwoods. The ghost trees I had come searching for. They glowed faintly in the dim light, ethereal and unsettlingly beautiful. My original goal. Achieved in the worst possible way. But it wasn't just the trees. At the base of the largest albino, partially obscured by its pallid, drooping branches, was something constructed. A crude structure woven from fallen branches, decaying logs, and thick, fibrous strips that looked disturbingly like the creature's own bark-like hide. It resembled a nest, or perhaps a den, large enough to shelter something man-sized, or larger, and emanating from it, faint but unmistakable, was that same rank, musky, metallic smell. I stood frozen, hidden behind a massive, normal redwood, staring at the ghost trees and the grotesque structure nestled among them. Was this its lair? Did it live here, among these spectral, parasitic trees that locals called bad omens? The connection felt chillingly appropriate. Creature born of the deep, ancient, and sometimes aberrant forest, dwelling among its strangest creations. Then, a sound from within the structure. A soft rustling, followed by a low, wet click. The same sound the creature had made when it loomed over me in the gully. It was in there. It was home. And I had stumbled right into its heartland. The fog swirled, threatening to close the gap, trapping me in this haunted grove. My escape felt more impossible than ever. The forest wasn't just a place where the creature lived. The forest was the creature, ancient, vast, and utterly terrifying. And I was caught in its heart, seized, trapped. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. The rustling within the crude nest ceased, replaced by that same heavy, expectant stillness that had preceded its appearance before. It knew. Somehow, despite my cautious approach, despite the muffling fog, it knew I was there. The air grew thick, charged with unseen energy. The faint, sickly sweet smell of the albino trees, mixing with the creature's rank odor into something uniquely nauseating. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But my legs felt like lead, my sprained ankle a throbbing anchor rooting me to the spot. I was hidden. Yes, behind the immense girth of a normal redwood. But it felt like hiding behind a pane of glass. The sense of being observed was absolute, drilling into the back of my skull. I risked the slowest possible backward step, my boot heel sinking slightly into the soft loam. Snap. A dry twig, hidden beneath the layer of damp needles, broke with a sound like a gunshot in the unnatural quiet. Inside the woven structure, there was a sudden, sharp intake of breath, that wet, ragged sound I remembered from the gully, followed by a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the ground. Panic finally broke the paralysis. Adrenaline surged, momentarily numbing the pain in my ankle. I spun, abandoning stealth, and plunged back into the swirling fog, away from the spectral glow of the ghost trees. Behind me, the nest erupted. Branches cracked, and something immense tore through the woven wall with terrifying force. Heavy, impossibly fast footsteps pounded the earth, closer than I could have imagined. It wasn't just chasing now, it felt enraged. The fog was my only ally, a disorienting shroud that hopefully concealed me as much as it confused me. I pushed through the ghostly white arms of the albino redwoods, their pale needles brushing against my face like cold, dead fingers. The ground here was uneven, littered with fallen, brittle branches from the parasitic trees. I stumbled, catching myself on one of the white trunks. Its bark felt strangely smooth, almost clammy, unlike the rough, fibrous hide of the normal redwoods. A guttural roar echoed nearby, closer now. I pushed off, scrambling forward, my lungs burning, vision swimming. The fog seemed to thin slightly ahead, the less opaque gray suggesting the edge of this haunted grove. Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered within me. Then, the ground gave way. Not a fall this time, but a sudden dip into a boggy patch hidden by ferns. Mud sucked at my boots, halting my momentum instantly. I struggled, pulling frantically, but I was stuck fast. The crashing footsteps behind me slowed, then stopped. Thump, thump, thump. The deliberate, heavy tread approached. I twisted, yanking my good leg free, trying to find purchase, my eyes scanning the fog. A towering shape solidified out of the mist looming over me, closer than ever before. I could see it more clearly now, bathed in the diffuse, eerie light filtering through the fog and the pale canopy. The bark-like hide wasn't uniform. It seemed to shift and writhe subtly, like a colony of insects beneath a woody shell. Patches of dark, matted hair clung to it, interwoven with moss and dried leaves. Its limbs were too long, jointed at unnatural angles. The head, elongated and grotesque, tilted down, those pale, luminous eyes fixing on me with an unnerving lack of emotion, not anger, not hunger, just ancient, alien awareness. The smell was overpowering, a wave of decay, wet earth, and something sharp, like ozone or static electricity. It raised one of its root-like hands, the sharpened appendages dripping mud and some dark, viscous fluid. It reached down, not with speed, but with a slow, inevitable certainty. This was it. The end, no escape. My mind fractured, flashing images of my life, the absurdity of dying here, hunted by something that shouldn't exist, in a forest that felt actively hostile. Just as the root fingers were about to brush my face, a sound pierced the fog, distant but distinct. A sharp, metallic crack followed by another. Gunshots, poachers, rangers. I didn't know, didn't care. The creature froze. Its head snapped up, tilting, listening. The pale eyes shifted away from me, focusing on the direction of the sound. A low, clicking moan vibrated in its chest. It hesitated for a fraction of a second, its gaze flicking back to me, pinned and helpless in the mud. Then, with another low growl, it turned. With astonishing speed, it melted back into the fog and the spectral trees. The heavy footsteps receding rapidly until only the oppressive silence remained. I didn't wait. Fueled by a terror that transcended pain and exhaustion, I wrenched my trapped leg free with a sickening squelch, ignoring the fiery agony in my ankle. I scrambled out of the mud, crawling at first, then staggering to my feet, pushing through the last of the ghost trees and into a section of forest where the fog was noticeably thinner, the air less charged. I didn't look back. I just ran, or stumbled, as fast as I could, away from the albino grove, away from the nest, away from the impossible thing that dwelled there. I don't know how long I walked. Hours bled into a gray eternity. I never found a trail, never saw another soul. Eventually, miraculously, I broke through the tree line onto a logging road. Muddy and rutted, but blessedly real. I followed it for miles until, dehydrated and delirious, I collapsed. A pair of loggers found me later that day. I told the rangers a story, got lost, injured my ankle, panicked in the fog. How could I tell them the truth? Who would believe me? They found my abandoned campsite, they tent ripped open, supplies scattered. Bear attack, they concluded. Case closed. But I know what happened. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. Something ancient. Something tied to the very roots of that primeval forest. Something that watches from the shadows, particularly near those pale, spectral trees locals call ghosts. I got away, but I left a part of myself back there, in the mud under the gaze of those luminous eyes. The redwood forest is beautiful, awe-inspiring, ancient, but it holds secrets. Deep, dark, terrifying secrets. And sometimes, if you wander too far off the path, into the heart of its oldest groves, you might just stumble upon one. Pray you don't. Pray you never feel the touch of those roots, like fingers, or meet the gaze of the redwood creature. Because even if you escape, like I did, you'll never truly be free. It's still out there, waiting.